All right, so here we are in Maya. I'm going to try to talk a little bit in class on how to navigate around Maya, cameras, the tools, some of the different menus and things like that. I'm not going to overly hit this stuff in this video. I'm going to assume at this point that there's some Maya knowledge. But yeah, so let's go ahead and start talking about our map painting and getting that inside of Maya and set up. And yeah, so let's go from there. So first things first, we need to create an actual projection camera, right? So we have our default cameras that Maya gives us. And by the way, if you don't see the outliner, you can just click this little button right here and it opens the outliner. And so we have these default cameras that Maya gives us. So one perspective camera and then some orthographic cameras. And so we want to create a new camera that we can designate as our projection camera. Okay. And this main perspective camera, this will be our working camera. And in this window, we can see if we look down here, this tells us what camera we're looking out of, right? So there's that perspective camera, and that says we're looking out of our perspective camera. Okay. And then for every camera, there's always going to be a menu for that camera. So if we set up this view to have multiple cameras, then there'll be a menu for each one of those cameras. Okay. But we'll look at that here in a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our projection camera created. So I'm going to come up to create, down to cameras, and I'm just going to come over to this camera option. And as we can see, that dropped a camera into our scene. Now we want to name these because there are some more advanced workflows that we're not going to get into, but if map paintings are something that you enjoy and you want to push further, there are multi-projection camera types of setups where you can have multiple projection cameras. Okay. Now we're only going to use one projection camera, but I do want you to know that you can do that, and that's a definite and viable workflow. And so if you're going to have multiple projection cameras, you want to make sure that each one of those cameras are named appropriately so that you can keep those organized. So it's a good practice just to get into naming your cameras. And so even though we're going to only have one projection camera, we're going to go ahead and create a naming for that. And so I'm going to call this proj, and then capital C, and then cam, and then 1, right? And so that if you had another projection camera, you can name that projcam2, projcam3, and so forth. Again, we only have one, so we'll just be doing that, but that's a good practice to get into. Okay, so the next thing is I want to actually look out of this camera, right? Because as I mentioned, we can see what camera we're looking out of, and we're looking out of our perspective camera. So I want to look out of the projection camera. So in this menu up here for this camera, I can actually change what camera I'm looking out of by going to panels, perspective, and then you can see, oh, there's my perspective camera, and there's my projcam1 camera. So I'm going to select projcam1. And now down here we can see projcam1. We can see that we are now looking out of that camera. And the same typical types of movement. So alt left, right, allows us to tumble. Alt right allows us to zoom in and out. Alt middle allows us to pan around. And then if we just roll the middle mouse button without alt, we could zoom in and out again. So again, alt and middle, you have to use that middle mouse as a button to do that. Okay, alt left, alt right, alt middle is a button, and then roll the mouse. Okay, and so now we're looking out of this projection camera. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to get in our digital map painting so that we can start to orient our scene to fit our map painting. So we want to get our camera angled in a way that at least feels fairly close to what our map painting work is going to be. So we are looking out of our projcam1. We can tell that because it says that down here. And with that, looking out of that camera, we want to come to view, down to image plane, and we want to come over to import image. Okay, I'm going to copy this this path. You can navigate there, but since I already had it up, I just figured I'd just copy and paste that path in here. Okay, so I typically like to, when I'm setting this up just for the first time from the camera, when I'm setting up that image plane, I want the whole digital matte painting, all of it, okay? And that'll be kind of our working view, and then we will project some of these other ones, okay? So I'm gonna do the digital matte painting. And now we can see we have our digital matte painting inside of Maya. And now as I tumble around, you can see the image doesn't really move anymore. It is, but it's moving along with the camera. And so that now allows me a way to kind of start to orient this ground plane. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to orient it with the with this water. And what I'm trying to do is just get something that feels somewhat okay with perspective. So I'm using this water line, trying to get that to aim at that water line. Okay. And then I'm also trying to make this line feel like it's going along the base of that kind of water structure. So maybe something like this. And you can noodle this for a while trying to get this just right. So I just want this pointing as though it'll get to that water line. I'm going to do a quick test. I'm going to drop in a cube. And I want to move the cube so that it's sitting on top of this plane. So I need to move this pivot. So if we look at this pivot and I rotate this around, you'll see that that cube is rotating around the middle, and I want it to rotate and move around from the bottom. So I need to change my pivot, and the way I access the pivot mode is D as in dog, but I also want to snap that point to the bottom. And so the snapping option is the key V as in Victor. So I'm holding D as in dog and V as in Victor. And then I'm just going to grab just this top arrow and pull that down. And then let go of D as in dog and V as in Victor. Okay, and now we can see that that pivot point is at the bottom. So like this is now rotating from the bottom. Okay, so now I want to move this cube so that it's sitting on top of the grid. So I'm going to hold X as in Xavier. And I'm grabbing just that top arrow. And now I can see that's sitting perfectly on that ground plane. So I'm going to push this off into space and see, like, does that feel like it's hitting kind of these areas. So like if and we'll actually model this in a minute, but I'm gonna make that kind of like that. And does that feel like that's hitting that water plane? So if we move that around, maybe something like that. And so I'm just using this again. This doesn't have to be perfect, but I just want to get that as close as possible. And so maybe something like that, because I do feel like that's getting close. Okay, so I think that's going to work. And so I'm going to do Control Z a little bit, and that's going to just kind of bring that cube back to the center. And let's leave that cube there for now, because we'll use that in a minute. And by the way I got to the wireframe view is I just hit 4 on the keyboard. But you can also hit 5, and you can also hit 6. And we'll actually want to be in the 6 mode so that we can see textures. 5 is shaded, so it'll give us like lighting and stuff like that, but we won't see like shaders. So when we project our matte painting, we do want to see things. So 6 and 4 probably are going to be what we use the most. Okay. All right, cool. So at this point, I feel like that's oriented fairly well. The next thing I want to do though is, like, if I move my camera right now, I'm going to lose this position. And so I don't want to lose this position. I want to lock this camera in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to select the projectCam. And then I'm going to click over here, making sure that in these little tabs that I'm in the one that says Channel Box Layer Editor all the way to the right. And with projectCam 1 selected, I'm going to click on Translate X. And then I'm going to shift click on visibility, and that's going to give me all of those selected. So I want to click on the words, not the numbers. Now I'm going to right click and I'm going to come down to an option called lock selected. And now that has actually locked all these. So now if I come out here and try to do Alt and left and Alt and right and Alt and middle, I can't move the camera because that has now been locked. And so yeah, we are good to go. So the next thing we want to do is we've locked this camera, so this camera is going to remain stable and we can build up our projections and things like that from here. But the other thing that I want to do is I want to set up a way that I can zoom in with the camera, right? So the camera won't actually move, but I can actually make this image larger, and then I can also move left and right and up and down within the image. Again, the camera stays steady, but I can still zoom around within this image, and that'll be important. Like if I'm trying to model something back here, that's kind of hard to see, so it might be nice to have a way to be able to zoom in on those areas. And so this is how we're going to do this. We need to make sure if we come up here and we click display that this there's a check mark next to shapes. For this to work, we need to make sure that there is a check mark there. Okay. And what that'll allow us to do is it'll allow us to open up our camera, and now we can see that there's a projectionCam1 and then a projectionCam shape 1. And so we want to click on our projectionCam shape 1 option. And again, making sure we're in our channel box layer editor, we'll see that there's a bunch of attributes here. And we want to add a couple attributes here that it's going to, again, allow us to zoom in, move around left and right and up and down. Okay, so the question becomes like, how do we do that? Well, there's an option with that selected. We go to Windows, General Editors, and Channel Control. If we open that up, that's going to bring up this channel control menu, and over here we'll see 3 windows. So keyable, non-keyable, and hidden, and non-keyable and displayed. And so right here, like, we can see center of interest. Well, if we come over here and we look, we can see center of interest, right? So all of these attributes are over here. And there's some attributes that you might want to play around with, like your f-stop and focal length and all that sort of stuff. We're not going to play around with this stuff for what we're going to do. So I'm going to hide all this so that it's not in our way. But that's just an FYI, like if you want to play around with some of that, you totally can. So I'm going to come here, and what we want to do is we want to take these keyable options and we want to move them into this window, right, so that they're hidden. And so we have these little move, right, so we can move things to the right or we can move things to the left. And so we want to move these things to the right. So I'm going to click move, move, and I'm going to do that for all of these. Okay. Okay. Now we can see that there's only one thing, and that's this locator scale. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to click this little move to move it here. Okay. So now what we want to do is we now want to put a couple things into this window that will allow us to zoom in, zoom out, all that sort of stuff. So there's actually an option called overscan, and all this is in alphabetical order. So you just want to scroll down to like the O's, and you'll find one that's called overscan, and we want to move that over here. There's another one called vertical film offset. We want to click on that, and then we want to move it over here. Okay, and now we want to find horizontal film offset, and we want to move that over there. And so now we can see we have access to all those. So I'm going to go ahead and close this window now that we've exposed those there. And I want to take a look at this. So if I hover my mouse like over the number, you'll see like the second I do that, that there's like a double line with a double arrow pop up. What that means is, like, yes, I could click in here and type numbers, but this double arrow means I can click and drag. And so if I click and drag, you can see I can move left and right. The problem is, you'll notice when I move left, it goes to a full -1. If I go right, it goes to a full 1. And so these are really large jumps that I don't want to make jumps quite that large. So we could come in here and again type like 0.1. 0.2 and so forth, but that could be more clicking than I want to do. So there's another option and to manipulate these, and that's by actually using the text. And so if I click on the text, what I can do is once this text is selected, I can come out here and use my middle mouse button, and now I can zoom. And now if you notice as I'm doing that, it's doing it by, instead of like a full integer value, it's now doing it by floating point or decimal. Okay. So instead of jumping over by a full 1, now it's jumping over by like 0.1 and so forth. Okay. I'll put that back at 0. Now the problem is, if you notice, like that's still kind of moving a little fast for my taste. So I want to slow this down even a little bit more. So how do we do that? Well, there's these little icons up here, and the only one I want you to worry about is this middle one. And if you notice, it's like this little not completed little wheel, and it's almost all the way full. Like it's almost all the way teal. And if I click on it again, it's gonna now fill the whole thing up. But if I click on it again, we'll see now that there's just a little bit of teal. And this is the option that we want. Now, just FYI, if you ever click too far, you'll see like, oh, it just toggles between states. So now it's like halfway full, almost full, full, and then back to that little wedge. Okay, and that's what we want. So now if I click on a horizontal film offset, the text, and I come out here and I middle mouse, you'll see that I'm moving much slower. And this is going to be much easier to control. So for example, if I wanted to zoom in on this area, I could click on overscan. I could zoom in. I could use my horizontal and my vertical film offsets to look at whatever I want to look at. So I can really zoom in on areas. So if I'm like doing some modeling or something like that, I can really come in and see exactly like where that bridge top is, right? So if I zero all this back out, 0, and then overscan of 1, you can see like that's going to be hard to see if we're not zoomed in on that area. So this is going to provide us a way in to kind of zoom around within our image without changing our camera. Now, just FYI, if we click on this Project Cam 1, you're not going to see those as easily. You can still see them down here, so you can still use them here. Okay. But if you just want to click on the Project Cam shape, you can see them right there too, and that's the only thing you're seeing. But you can click here too. They're right there. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. And at this point, I think we are now ready to start setting up our projection shaders and then start to create some models and so forth.